Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery.
There we go. Wow, I'm blending into the leafscape here with my fall shirt, I guess.
You should have done your face up like camo or something.
At one point, we were on the way to the Mets annual gathering in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we stopped by at Circus World in, let's see, Delavan, Wisconsin, something like that, right near Wisconsin Dells. And I got my face painted as a tiger because why not? And then I didn't take it off there. I drove across the face of Wisconsin and Minnesota and showed up at the AG. And, first people, I don't know, when you're big and you look insane, they don't make fun of you. They kind of steer away from you. So I had to make a point of being extra smiley and so forth and saying, don't worry, I'm not going to go on a spree. I'm actually just, I went to Circus World. Anyway, it was, I don't usually get my face painted, and yet that was a good experience with, what if you look like a professional wrestler? What's the Mexican luchado? No, where they actually have the whole costume.
Yeah.
Exactly, luchador. That's it. It's kind of cool to have just a different. I mean, that's what Halloween. Halloween coming up is all about, is assume a different identity, get a different reaction than your usual. I can't make myself smaller, but I can look like an animal. I can dress up as a woman. I can dress up as a pirate, whatever else it might be that would be different than my usual demeanor, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And the two places you could show up like that without getting too weird of looks would be Wizard World or Mensa.
Exactly.
If I showed up at my kid's school like that, they might ask me to leave,
Yeah. Sir, are there troubles at home? Do you want to tell us about why you have this?
Right.
Well, as you know, as usual, just because we're right on the topic, one of the things I thought that would be fun to talk about, because we're heading into Halloween, is I've always loved good costumes. And, so when you see a lot of kids come up and, hey, I'm a pirate because they have a little scarf and an eye patch. I'm a bum because they put some, smeared their face a little bit. When you see someone that did full robot and they've got a Borg level of LEDs running up and down, and they're all, I just love when people put some work, some love into a costume. And as you know, there's the big Mensa Chicago area Halloween party. Halloween always has a big costume parade where the costumes are often puns. And man, I've been going there for 30 years, and it's really impressive, the continual creativity and the love that goes into them. And just when, so I don't know, sometimes there's certain ones I've seen. Serial killer, for instance, where someone's dressed as a cereal box but with some knife holes in it or something like that, or variations on that. And I've seen Paradise. There's some obvious puns, if you will, but when someone comes up with, after 30, 40, 50 years of Mensa puns, they come up with something new and topical and stuff like that. I love those. They had one of those, especially for the geek crowd, someone dressed up as a Klingon and had all of his gear, his tackle box and his fishing pole and stuff like that, and he come up, I am Fisherman's Wharf, and and I just, there's a certain crowd that wouldn't care about that, get that, but it had a wonderful explosion of laughter. And so anyway, there's some legendary ones. I remember there was one with someone dressed with all kinds of hair all over him and a hypodermic, and that was a furry with a syringe on top. Well, the puns get more and more elaborate and great.
Yeah.
There were a group of, I'm trying to think what it was, 27 different people that came out on stage and said, I'm Sybil, because of the multiple person. They just, like I said, I have certain favorites. Colleen and I have dressed up, before we knew each other, we often dressed up but liked each other's costumes. And that's one of the ways in which you can get an idea of, wow, that person's really amusing, smart. You know what I mean? They're bold. Sometimes you wear a costume that's wow, that's not flattering. That's, I guess you're going for the laugh. So, when I dress up with just a diaper on, that's a lot of me out there. You know what I mean?
There are definitely some brave people that you wonder
Exactly.
about sometimes. And what you were saying about the costumes, that we went to a hobby, was it a Hobby Lobby, I think,
Okay.
down like towards Canton,
Yeah.
and they had a whole cosplayer section. It had certain paints and glue and the rubber and the foam vinyl that you could cut in that. And I was like, that is the coolest thing. But now with 3D printers, people are coming up with stuff that they wouldn't have been able to really do before or would have been very difficult.
Exactly. A weapon that actually has the runes on it that is
Yeah.
authentic to the movie or the story, or
Yeah.
like that, a Borg half face mask or something like
Right.
that isn't just boy. I know what you.
It's definitely easier to do the 3D printer than to go through junkyards and put them together and paint it.
Right.
But it's also creative. The ones that I mean, I shake my head. We went to a costume contest with Jason a couple times and my kids when they were younger. And like these kids, they go to these stores and their parents buy them $150 costumes. They just walked in, tried it on, and then they win the contest. I'm like, that's kind of bullshit. These other kids spent hours on their costume and it's so cool, but it's the same thing everybody else has.
Yeah. As you know, it's not, of course, it's not only Halloween and Mensa. At every comic book convention that I go to, there's a huge cosplaying contingent, and I love that. And often, they'll have the big, one of the highlights of either Friday or Saturday night is the costume parade, and they'll have judges. And so much what they're looking for is not, you bought the perfect Iron Man costume, but how did you make that? You really made it out of those specific, foams and clays and stuff like that, that it looks like authentically metal shiny, but it doesn't weigh like metal. You couldn't wear 150 pounds of armor. You know what I mean? Right. And so the judges are usually quite canny in getting the awards too, and at least in the questioning of them, the accolades to the people that put love into the costume instead of, I backed the truck up, bought the costume, and here I am as a dragon, right. That kind of thing.
And that's definitely one of the things I appreciate about Menson's is if you show up at one of those things, Halloween being one of the biggest probably, and you bought a costume, people are going to look at you like, who cares? And they're not going to, it could be $1,000 costume. That's something straight off a movie set and it's authentic and everything, but you bought it and no one's going to care. But the people that spent time will get more appreciation. And I love that about Menson's. And I remember Gina, like a lot of people, the first time we went to something, I think Halloween was one of the first we went to.
Okay.
And she's kind of like, okay, I don't know these people. This isn't my crowd. And she's just nervous. And what do you guys do is just talk about rocket science and stuff. I'm like, well, no, not usually. And after her first time, she's like, oh my God, you guys, that was so much fun. Loved it. And she'll tell people, because you probably run into this kind of the bias. At times people will say, oh, Mensa, everyone thinks they're too good for each other, blah, blah, blah. And Gina jumps in. She's like, you don't understand. It was so much fun. And, so, yeah.
Exactly. Honestly, out of all the things I've done with Mensa, there must have been 1 out of 100 where people were really wielding their IQs like a sword. Most of the time, it's wonderful conversation. It ranges all over the place. People are very witty. They're very accepting of, all the odd things that people have picked up over the time. Or if they don't know about something, they don't have any sense of vulnerability. It's more, well, tell me more about that. Yes. Everyone's curious. Everybody's game for trying a new game or having a different conversation. And especially like, I don't know, Colleen and I pride ourselves on, what can we make with things found around the house? I want to spend like $1, on some makeup that I don't happen to have, but otherwise it's, let's take a sweatsuit. And at one time I took a sweatsuit and I put letter K's all over it, that I bought from like, a stickum letter that you can use to make a sign for your house or something like that. And so I was 640K of RAM, you know what I mean? And I had the RAM helmet on, but like, and sometimes when I go through the costume box, it's like, well, that was really good costume. And like I said, that cost $5. And sometimes you find a way, well, if I can use that ram's head something else, then now the cost per costume is $250. I got 2 uses of the ram head. And I have sweatsuits that I've turned into a cow pattern or the 640K of Ram, and like, I don't know, I think maybe one of them I've worn out in public because I was just amused as hell. People will say, where'd you get those cow pants? Like, well, actually, I made them. Oh my God. You know,
I entertain myself.
yes, exactly.
I remember clear back, like third, fourth grade. Even back then, we always had the thing at school. We had the little parade and costume and all that. And I wanted to be Spider-Man. But even back then, I didn't want to just go buy a Spider-Man costume. So I
Right.
made my own. We had made little spiders in class for Halloween, whatever. So I
Okay.
took some cheesecloth to pull over my face and then just a brown paper bag, and I decorated it with spider webs all over it.
See,
And I
that's
was
great.
Spider-Man,
Exactly.
you know?
Especially, I've been to not only, of course, Mensa Halloween parties, but others where then when you like, we aren't the only people that appreciate puns. And so when I showed up as one time I dressed up as a big Viking and I had a Sigma on my chest. And so I was a Thor sum. I stood out like a Thor sum. And some people got it. And others, they had to even be explained, they don't know that Sigma is a summation symbol and stuff like that. But then when they got it, it was like, well, that's pretty cool. Out of two things, you made a costume instead of having to do full pirate or full robot or full
Right.
Star Wars action figure type stuff, So I've always gone for that. I guess I've never been a great artist, but I'm a great caricaturist because I can look at something and say, if I'm going to try to portray Elton John, and there's games that do this, the who, what, where type games where you have to draw this thing, this person in this place doing this thing. Well, I'm not going to try to make a person that looks like Elton John. I'm going to draw a big stick figure with like glasses and high-heeled shoes, and then boom, Elton John. And so that's kind of what my costumes are, is what's the most obvious thing about me? And then that's got to be part of the name of the costume. And so I don't know, I've really had good success with like this is again going on tape. I did a costume
On
where
tape, really, Al?
I know. See, it's kind of funny. We'll talk about that. How to date yourself. Yeah, we're okay. Roll the tapes.
Right.
I haven't been using anything but digital. It's
Anyway.
I once glued feathers all over me and had a big owl mask. And I also had one of those blow up mylar fish that you can buy as a balloon. I had that like duct tape so it was jutting from my groin. And so I was Hootie and the Blowfish. And for years after that, Menson's, that was like the example they gave of their favorite costume. So when you're not only funny to yourself, but people actually, it's memorably funny. I'm just so proud of that. I know it's vulgar, or at least edging on vulgar, but it just is that to get people like, again, the big uproarious laugh. When I walked up, people hadn't figured it out. And so I kind of stepped to the mic and went like, hoo, Hootie and the Blowfish. And that explosion of laughter was like, man, I have never felt better about myself. Right. This is so cool.
and that, that's funny you say that, because that's the other thing. There are a lot of Mensons, they get that bordering on the sexual thing, but it's always that subtle bordering. It's not explicit. It's not the naked, half naked nurse, the naughty nurse and all that. It's more subtle and explicit. And it's just a sign of something, this sounds elitist, but something a little higher thinking. It's not so base level.
Exactly. I think that's true. What I mean? I try not to be abrupt, overt, offensive. Like, right. I never wear a t-shirt with a swear word on it. I might swear out loud, but there's something different where you don't have the choice of who am I talking to? What's the context? And then my choosing to say fuck is a different thing than everyone that sees me that day, from the little old lady to the child to the store clerk, is going to say, well, this guy has fuck on his shirt. How, it's like blunderbuss instead of rifle shot or something like that. I want to choose how I'm going to use my words.
So that's why I want a line of t-shirts that has Victorian swear words on it, because we don't use them anymore. Arfin. That's one of my favorites.
Like that. When you see the good Shakespearean insults, thou God swallow, that kind of stuff. It's
it's like some of my favorite shirts. I remember there's no place like 127.0.0.1.
If you got to be geek, you got it. Exactly.
Or the other one was it looks like there are only 10 people that understand binary. It's 1-0.
1-0, exactly. That
So
I know I've seen where you're like, there's two kinds of people in the world. One, people who can extrapolate from insufficient data, and then nothing else.
yes, yes,
That really is pushing the border of geekery, but that's exactly, you're kind of finding your crowd by who laughs and who goes, what the hell does that mean?
right,
You know what I mean? I'm
right.
going to have a good conversation with the first and maybe not so much with the second.
And it's so funny because if I do have a shirt or something like that, there are certain people, especially family, that I don't associate with very much. I don't get along with too well. And I notice when I wear those types of shirts, they're always like, well, what's that mean? And I'm like, how do I explain this? I mean,
Yeah.
it's okay. Hold on, let's take a half hour so I could like give you the whole basis here. Uh, you know,
Right.
so
Some people find it funny. You know what I mean? It's like,
right,
well, it's kind of funny. It's not only like smarties and not smarties. Even in the smarties, there's some people that their smarty is very pedantic and they're
yeah,
very much like definitional and so forth. And so any number of time, but and this is it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, and yet it's only funny. Like when you tell a joke, and part of a joke is it's not meant to be literal. It's meant to be a little variation on what was being talked about. There's a different use of the word, so it's
right.
paraprosdokian, and you start off in a certain direction and then make a left turn. And when someone insists on saying, well, the reason that joke isn't valid because a tick, there's like what's the difference between lawyers and blood ticks, blood sucking insects, without going into the exact joke. And someone then jumps on, well, as you know, ticks aren't insects, they're arachnids. And it's like, wow, you not only managed to not get the joke, but you're trying hard to spoil it for everybody else. You
Yes,
could just listen to everybody else and pick up on why it's funny instead of insisting that, and that kind of dissection, or that kind of, I don't know, man. There's certain people that whenever that they're literal, and so there's a little bit of playing a game with them. You know what I mean? If you're gonna talk about a certain topic that they know something about, and they're not going to be able to resist then offering what they've talked about before. And so there was one guy that it was about hot and sour soup. And if you said hot and sour soup at any dinner, they launched into their story about hot and sour soup. It was this response button that you could push. And it was like, I kind of thought that people weren't like that they go from context, or they go from, has everybody else here already heard my story and therefore I don't need to repeat it? But they're not. There's a certain, I don't know, maybe it's along the spectrum. Maybe it's that they are insecure in creation and one-off type things, but they know if they told a story that did get a certain amount of laughter, that like any stand-up comic, do you have your tight 10 that these are your surefire good lines, and if you have to improvise, it automatically kind of throws them into I'm not as confident, I'm not as witty when I'm just having to create things instead of
right.
I've had a chance to perfect this, to tighten it up. And I don't know, I feel kind of bad for reciters instead of improvers, because most of the world kind of calls on you to be an improver. You know what I mean?
Right,
You're
right.
always bumping into situations that you don't know what to do next, and keep trying to slot things into a pattern. It's a very limiting thing to me. And we've talked about this before. When I speak, I don't recite. I tend to have an outline and I speak to it. And I have so much stuff that I want to say that it never comes out the same way twice.
Right.
But it doesn't come across as fragmented. It comes across as, wow, that framework is enough structure to hang the entire talk on without having to be, okay, I'm going to start reciting, and then if I get interrupted, oh, I'm jarred and I have to come back to where I was. And I don't know, some people recite where it's still very, very smooth, and you don't know that it's until you see them like 2 nights later and it's exactly the same act. You don't realize that even the pauses, even the little spontaneous
Are
quips, were like waiting for that to
yep,
happen.
yep, yep.
And I don't know, I tend to not have as much respect for recitation as I do for, and I'm not as good at it when I've been in productions like the Mensa show or something like that, and I really had to recite somebody else's lines. I don't mean to hurt their feelings, but once in a while, often I would come up with, there's a better line here, but I don't want to throw off the scene, because the scene counts on you get on the train and you ride the train and you
Right.
get off at the end. And if I go onto a sidetrack here, literally and figuratively, I've just spoiled this segment of the show. And yet my mind has always been blessed to like have those, a whole bunch of choices to make. And then when you say one, it's because you thought, what is my context? What could be the wittiest? What have people heard before? And I'm always trying to, like, I don't know, make myself laugh, build on what I've done.
Yes.
I often, if people that I hang out with, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry if you've heard this before. And if enough people say, yeah, we have, it's be like, then let's move on. I don't need to
I,
say it one more time.
I definitely get looks from my family because I make myself laugh quite often, but they look at me like, what the hell was that? It's like, okay, well, they've
Right.
kind of gotten used to it now. And
Yeah.
you were talking about the people in Mensa, and I've made the observation that if you take any large gathering of Mensas and you like squish them all together into one person, you would have somebody with super autism because just about everybody has some little quirk and eccentricities and ticks and this and that would fall very high on the autism spectrum scale, but they don't have enough of them to be completely autistic. But everybody has like 3 or 4 different ones. So
Right.
it's a super interesting time at sometimes because you get the personality quirks from just about everybody. It's like, who is going to like want to discuss something very strictly, and somebody who's joking on everything, and somebody who's into the games, and that's the
Right.
thing that a lot of people don't understand is Mensa isn't because we can memorize history and we have all the dates. There are people like that. I'm not one of them. I know general, but
Nor is just knowing the dates really funny and interesting. It's like, anyway, what you make
yeah,
of it. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So,
yeah. So they don't get the IQ part of it. There's different layers and levels of it that different people have different things they're smart in.
yeah,
Just like, I could be a fast runner, but maybe not a strong thrower of a football or something.
that kind of thing. I'll tell you, this is a story that I told early on in my Mensa career, but I've stopped telling it as much because I've said it too many times. My early Mensa meetings were very exploratory. Even though I knew I was a smarty from early on, I didn't discover Mensa until like the mid 70s. And I dipped a toe in with like when I went downtown because there was a specific monthly meeting on chess, and I was really into chess and into cryptozoology, which your Colin would be very happy
Yeah,
to hear
yeah.
that. Yep, I was into it early on too.
But
And
crypto means more than just Bigfoot.
that's more than
Animals in
just Bitcoin and Ethereum.
areas. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly right. So having said that, I remember going to a Mensa meeting, and it was like I also had no idea what it was going to be like. Is it going to be okay? Everybody share your big IQs and let's all compare our. Uh, it was instead wide-ranging conversation, but I also had there was a guy that was really into Sherlock Holmes. He was one of the Baker Street irregulars that ran the local chapter in Chicago, and no matter what you were talking about, that's what he talked about. So you could be talking about something on TV and be like, yes, that also occurred in the Sign of the Four. And that level of like a little bit of hijacking conversation, a little bit of obsession was a little bit weird. And so that's I had that taste of, there is that segment of Mensa that they really are too into Legos, too into Sherlock Holmes, whatever else it might be. And that I love Sherlock Holmes enough that I was happy to have a conversation with them. But after a while, you notice that some other people are checking out of the conversation because they aren't as into the Sherlock Holmes canon as that, and that he can't stop himself. And so then the next time that I'm with him, maybe I'll get a little dose of Sherlock Holmes, but he's not the guy who I'm going to spend the entire gathering with.
Right.
I want more variety than that. And so that's just something that you learn, that the people that are really into NASA, the people that are really into cooking, it's okay. My polymathic interests are enough that I can have conversations with each of those people. And I know this is an odd thing to say. I probably have lots of people that think I'm a big friend of theirs because I'm kind of one of the only people that will talk to them. They're so obsessed in some ways,
Yeah.
and I don't know that that's only autism. Some people are just really, they're fanatic. They're siloed in what they care about. And I like, let's talk about old Woody Allen movies if you'd like. But then after you've had that conversation, I'm going on a little bit too long. There are those people, and not only in Mensa, but in the world, when you sit down with somebody and all they want to do is talk like bar trivia about sports, and like, wow, I'm kind of cool that I actually know a couple of these, but that's not enough. It's not
Right,
enough for like all of what you're out there to be
right.
doing in the world. You know what I mean? So
And that's also makes Mensa Gathering so interesting because you will have those people totally into Sherlock Holmes, but you have the other people totally into cryptozoology, and other people who read 3 books a day, and other people that are making movies. That's the great thing. There's so many interests, and I think the thing that's threatening to some people is that, because I look at other people and what's their interest? Well, I go to work, I come home, eat dinner, watch TV till I fall asleep, and then I watch the game on the weekends. That's their whole life. And man, most of us would like kill ourselves. And like, oh my God, I'm so done with this life, you know?
Yeah. Well, that early discovery about Mensa was that, especially, I am so curious about everything that going to a place where you did have, I don't care about having a dozen different obsessive people. If I get a wonderful conversation with each of them, I'm still, wow, tell me more about Banff, Canada. Tell me more about submarines. It just, I
Yeah.
love that kind of thing. And in fact, the, some part of one of my superpowers is, in a crowded place, instead of my having to tune in on a specific conversation, I can kind of go into full receiver mode and kind of catch all of what's being said, and I can jump in and out of various different conversations, or pull in a thread from what somebody just said to kind of get them to come into the group, because I try to be very welcoming. It isn't only a series of one-on-ones. It is cool to have everybody at the table talking about, and there's a flow to it, of how things go in and out of what you're talking about. The people that insist on bringing the conversation back to only one topic can be disruptive to that. But otherwise, it's kind of cool. I was trying to be an orchestrator of, everybody has something to offer. Tell us more about, you have an Abyssinian cat. That's not a common cat breed. And there'd be a little start where they go, wow, I didn't realize that he was listening. And one Benson actually caught that and kind of called me on it, Helen Cupper, where she could tell that I was really picking up on all these little pieces. And I kind of gave her that shy smile of, and this is kind of funny, what she said was that I was the least autistic person that she knew.
See?
And so that's funny, because you and I have talked about where we might be on the spectrum, but actually, I guess I have that ability to go wide or narrow focus instead of only being the one or the other. And when she saw me doing that, she was like really, I guess, impressed, or at least amused by, how does somebody keep all that in their head going on and weave it in real time into a cool conversation. I don't know. I've kind of always had that. I often have music playing while I'm doing other things. I have TV on in the background. I in some ways, having something else going on actually helps me to concentrate better on the thing I'm working on, because in the act of tuning this out, it gives you focus on another thing. And bear with me, we had a whole list as usual of things we were going to talk about. But one of the things that I just said this last week online was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi just passed away. He's the author of Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And I'm glad that I'm thinking about it now, because I would have been sad if I had missed it. That book shaped me incredibly when I read it. And the way I put a little tribute online was, besides my parents, I can't think of many things that have had more of an influence on me. He talks about how that flow state of being your master of all the things you're thinking of and working on, you can keep more in short-term memory, so you're making connections you might not ordinarily. You're so absorbed in this cool, interesting thing you're working on that time seems to fade away, and you kind of come to 2 hours later without realizing 2 hours have passed. I'm really good at that. One of the ways in which I've been hyper productive at coding or writing or playing music, making music, whatever else it might be, is if I can create that atmosphere of avoiding interruptions, not having it be that there's other things on my mind, that you're the hyper productivity that you experience when you're really good at this thing, and you go into a database and you make it perfect in terms of how it works, how it hangs together, how it talks to the outside world. It's kind of hard to explain that to other people, that like you made connections that aren't obvious, but they're true, they're real, they bear out to be true. A little bit we've talked about with debugging. You know what I mean? It isn't only that you brute force it, you just have this kind of gestalt understanding of what might it be, and your first, second, third guess are very often right, so that after a while people kind of, wow, I don't know how you do it, but you do it. It's true that you do this well. And so hats off to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and all listeners, if you want to get a copy of this book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, it's a really good presentation of what that is, how it works, how to summon it more into your life. It does have a dark side, because sometimes when you over focus, you really like, oh, I shouldn't have played that game. and I played it for 3 hours, and now I still got stuff I should have gotten done. So you kind of like can't let it master you, but it has been so much the source of great accomplishments in my life. When I was working on the Moscow Commodities Exchange, when I was doing Gambit, and I created my atmosphere of here I am, and I'm working at night, so there's no interruptions in that way. And I got my music on, and most of the people at my shared office suites were gone. And so every night I was like falling into this cool thing of I'm learning a ton, I'm experimenting a lot, I'm getting, and just no wonder I was able to put together something really cool, maybe even amazing in about a year that is other people's like lifetime work. And it was very satisfying, not only in the result of it, but in the doing of it, to go into that cool state and to just know that, wow, this is really working. I can't believe it's really, anyway, I hope that you have that too. You have some of the same experiences. I think probably when you play music, you've talked about, it isn't only about like what you've memorized, it's being in the groove, it's listening to others. There's a certain amount of, it's not only being by yourself, that when you're in a jazz trio and there's almost telepathic communication between people, that you really do exactly the right shifts and chord changes and key changes at the right time. There's a very satisfying thing to, I kind of took myself out of it. My subconscious, my other mind is doing this instead of my conscious, but I'm creating something beautiful. Improv is like that, something beautiful right away. So. Where did that come from? I don't know, but I seem to be able to do it on a regular basis. How cool is that?
We talk about that a lot with writing, getting into that flow state and how you can get so much more done, and it's so much better work. But it's something you actually have to sometimes work to get to. Like music, like you said, it's a very good example. I can't get into that state. I can't just start letting it flow and express until I've got the basics mastered, until I know the fingerings, I know the chords, I know the whole fretboard, that I can play with my eyes shut because I don't need to stare at it.
Exactly. It's beyond fundamentals. Mastery. Yes, absolutely. It's mastery and the effortlessness of mastery when you've already got the 10,000 hours it took to get there.
Yes.
What I mean?
With that. Exactly. And same thing with martial arts. I always, kids who were struggling to get some of the upper forms and do those properly, and they just weren't the right, it's a little structured in exactly how you're moving at times, and they would be very sloppy, and I would be like, okay, well, let's go back and let's work on kicks and punches. Well, I know how to do those. Well, you need to do those when you don't think about it. And you can always see, like, you learn how to fall because we do various self-defense things, and we throw people, and we take it easy, but you have to know how to fall so you don't get hurt.
That's right. That's right.
But you have to do those falls so many times that you do it without even thinking. And ask my wife, I still do. I've fallen in the dark, just walked over a little 3-foot cliff almost, and she's like, oh my God, he's dead. And I stood up, brushed myself off. She's like, oh my God. And because instead of putting my hands down and falling on my face, I twisted and fell correctly, so I didn't even get hurt. And she'll grab my arm at times, and I don't even think about it. I just flip it around, and she's like, stop that. And I'm like, I can't.
It's in your muscle memory now. Exactly.
When you touch a hot stove, you pull your hand away. You don't think about it. Same with this. I just do it. But yes, the flow state with anything creative. And there's a book out called Big Magic that touches on that a little bit, and how using your creativeness in that. But so I was going to real quick make a comment of you're high on the spectrum for camouflaging. You hide all your autistic stuff. That's your high spectrum. So, but
it can be that those things that are like that, I've actually learned to like put humor to it, and then it's more acceptable. If I was only the guy that knows things he shouldn't know, and I was wielding it as a weapon, it wouldn't be as funny as in, well, I made a pun out of it, and maybe the pun source is obscure. So that really might be, you learn to.
There are times I will say something, and the people I'm with look at me like, what the hell are you saying? But it's a little like dry British humor, a little mortuary dark humor, and if I said it to you, you'd probably laugh and get it. If I said it at a men's gathering, most of them would laugh and get it. But sometimes I say it to other people and they don't always get it. And I have to watch myself, because then I get looked at like you're weird.
Yeah. Well, Colleen and I love going to stand up, as you know. And one of the interesting that happens at stand up is that there are some comedians that are they're trying out new material, or they know that their material isn't for everyone. And when we're sometimes the first people to laugh or the only people to laugh, sometimes they really love, okay, someone really got that joke. Who knew that a joke about Moliere would go over in Cleveland, Ohio? But you know what I mean? If they make a good enough whatever, and it doesn't have to be good enough, it just has to be not to everyone's taste, that they're not expecting to have something be double and triple layered and stuff like that. But then they start to pay attention to you a little bit more. We usually sit like first, second, third row. We don't mind being near the stage because we are good laughers and we give them good feedback so that they'll have more fun with their own set. And then it's kind of funny. They don't usually, we're not the young couple out on a date, so we're not perfect grist for the mill. But when they talk to us and we don't try to be funnier than them, that we just try to give them material to work with, we've had a number of people that really seem to be, they don't mind us being there. They don't think that we're the plant that's trying to wreck their act. You know what I mean? Or so drunk that they're insisting on, look, give me the mic, I'll do the show. Come on. So
right. Yeah, I can do that. That's easy.
Exactly.
That's a whole conversation. So you mentioned music. Let me tell you my weekend.
Okay, very good.
Because I went to New Orleans. See, my Vampires of New Orleans t-shirt.
Vampires in New Orleans. I knew this was coming. So this was the big world building workshop, the big shared.
Yes.
Okay.
Fantastic weekend. First of all, our group, what it is, Jay Thorne, Zach Bohannon, create these world building events with a theme. I went to the one in Salem for witches, and this one was vampires in New Orleans. And you take a couple extra days, you explore the city, you gather and soak up the atmosphere.
You're not going there just to be in a hotel. You're correct. There because they put it in Salem for a reason, in Nolens for a reason. Yeah. Right.
So the highlights of the whole thing, and I have a really cool story, so I'll make sure and share that when the anthology comes out. But the highlights were the very first day kicked off. It was a Zoom call, but Dacre Stoker got on and talked to all of us about the research.
Stoker, you mean like Bram Stoker related?
Grandnephew.
How cool is this?
Yes.
Wow.
So Dacre has researched it's his great grand uncle, Bram, into his writing and he does talks, and he's fantastic at talking. He actually got a first edition that his uncle had, and his uncle is signed, and he got those replicated. So I'm trying to get one. I didn't know they existed until recently, but anyway, So he actually has worked with JD Barker, who I've mentioned, and they wrote the prequel to Dracula using notes that Bram had on creating this. They figured out where the castle would be on a map, and they used some of the, because like in the preface to the Swedish edition of Dracula, it was longer than the English, and he talks about Jack the Ripper. So they include Jack the Ripper in their prequel story.
A little bit of Wolf Newton type things where, literary giant figures are actually, wow, did they know each other? Is there a shared world between them? Very interesting. Okay.
And he didn't just like throw something together. They literally went to libraries in London in special archives that they had to get permission to get to.
Right, put on the white gloves with human oil and all that kind of stuff.
They had the actual notes and stuff, and in the margin, Bram made notes of research books. They found research books at the library with his writing in them that he made notes on. So anyway, he talked to us, and that was pretty spectacular. Thursday night, we went to a private vampire speakeasy. You had to hear about it, had to find the right person to get the password to get in. So that was kind of fun and special. Really good drinks, some of the best drinks of the whole weekend.
Vampire themed, in other words, a plasma cocktail or whatever else it might be. I don't know.
Yeah, they had that all over the place.
Bloody Mary, of course.
We took a couple tours. You couldn't get into the cemeteries because of COVID, which made no sense. You can't go into a cemetery because they're worried about COVID, but they had a parade that we were packed in like sardines.
See,
whatever. Okay. Yeah, the parade was crazy. We really didn't stay for all of it. But it was the first parade in 18 months that they did. So
Wow. And you were there for that. I mean, that,
yeah,
I don't know, as you know, I'd be a little worried because you don't know everybody there is going to be safe and you're
right.
right amongst them and stuff like that. But as long as you were vaxxed and boosted and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff, or masked or whatever you were doing,
And
you're
most
hoping you're
of the
good.
places you had to show your card that you got vaccinated to come
The
into
vaccination
the
card.
place. So there was that. But just the atmosphere, the buildings and the architecture and all the bums, and everything. But we're talking about music. There were some really good street musicians and some really good. So if you ever go down, this is the tip. There's people all over asking for money constantly.
Right.
There's people performing on the streets. I said, okay, you know what? That person is working hard. They're giving me a great song, whether it's guitar or singing. I gave them some bucks. You're just coming up saying, hey, I need some money. Give me some money. No, I'm not giving all that,
Right.
my personal choice.
Honestly, once again, we're quite parallel. I have been to New Orleans a couple of times and had noticed that same thing. And not only New Orleans, but everywhere. I tend to still want, people don't have to abase themselves, but I really want it to be that if they're a busker and they're doing something to earn money, I want to encourage that activity, not
Yes.
just be, I'm down on my luck and I'm not even trying to get any better. You know what I mean? So I tend to be much more generous and yes, exactly what you're saying. So, okay.
So I got to visit William Faulkner's house. He lived in New Orleans for a while. I bought some Faulkner books, which I've not owned any Faulkner before. I visited Anne Rice's house. So it was an author trip in that regard.
Exactly. And she bases a number of her books on like recognizable scenes all throughout New Orleans, the vampire books. Anyway, okay.
And the other fun thing for me was I got to visit some of the places they use for settings in NCIS New Orleans with Scott Bakula. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. They have this
I have not.
Okay, they have this weird entrance to their headquarters. Okay. And I went to the spot and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. I took a picture of it.
Right. Very recognizable then. Okay. Yeah.
And I looked through the grate. It was just somebody's parking for the apartment. So they always filmed it so you didn't see that. So it's interesting because you think, oh, I go through here and there's the office in there. No, it's not at all. It's not connected.
It's only the fronting. Exactly.
Yeah. So that was fun. And, there was other sites. I got pictures where they filmed some interview with the vampire. They did the 3rd season of American Horror Story in one of the houses.
Exactly. Okay.
Mike Tyson was filming something there when we were down there.
And Trent Reznor's studio. I know that when he was doing like a couple albums, I think he did based out of a studio in New Orleans.
Yeah, he had a house down there. They pointed.
Exactly.
I didn't see that one, but they told about it. And they said, "Does anyone know who Trent Reznor is?" I says, "Yeah, he's from Cleveland." Geez,
exactly. Was at the Foundry, and exactly, you kind of broke out of here. Exactly.
Yeah. So it was a good weekend. I'm excited. We've got a lot of good stories. Everybody is excited to tell. So good vampire stuff. And I picked up way too many books. I said, well, I need to do some good research because I want to do vampires and voodoo in my story. So I really do need these 17 books because you can't get sufficient research unless you have 17 books.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm hope you don't mind. I'm very curious. Like when you guys are deciding what stories are going to be told, is there like negotiation? I guess multiple people will want to say, well, I want to tell the origin story of this character. Oh, but I already have an idea for that. And then they kind of decide who gets what or how they're going to interlock, or do you know what I mean? It's not
that's really interesting because we want to put all the books or all the stories in the book in a shared world, but we don't want to force everybody to use the same characters, the same time setting, and all that. So it's a balance. Like for the witches, we said we want to set it in Salem at any time period. And we were trying to figure out how to connect it because the different people had different aspects of witches they wanted to use. And we didn't want to limit people. We wanted them to tell their story, but it was basically, you need witches. That's the whole idea, Right. So we came up with a few conventions, like every story has to involve a spiral, that there was a spiral connecting all the different stories through the world. So it was very loose and open. This one, wasn't quite as much, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. What we did was we said, okay, we want to set it in the French Quarter. Everybody is in the French Quarter with vampires. And then we defined what a vampire is. So we would all have similar powers.
Got it.
If everybody agreed, yes, you can't see your reflection, that was in our world part of vampires. So,
Okay.
I mean, there are people setting it contemporary. That's in the 2000s. Mine is like 1700
All
is when mine's taking
And with
place.
vampires, you can do that because they are indeed immortal,
Right.
practically. And so there really should be that there's a procession through time, or that there's things that happened in the past that
Right.
might still impact now, and generationality and stuff like that.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it is different because we're not sitting down all the time like TV. People writing for a TV show. They have a Bible. They all follow. I might be writing this episode and you're on that one, but we have the same characters, the same quirks,
Right.
the
There's
same
a
background.
showrunner that's making sure there is continuity and correctness,
Yes.
if you will. Okay.
Yeah. This
Okay.
is a little bit looser, which lets everybody have their own style, their own. Because I like to write middle grade, but other people like to write thrillers, and other people like to write contemporary. So it
Exactly.
allows for
Urban
all of that.
fantasy and on historic fiction and whatever else it might be. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, it'll be good. So I've got both of those books should be coming out next year with
Very
stories
cool.
in it. So
Anybody there that you felt particularly simpatico with? Like sometimes it's not only that, wow, a dozen of us got together. I've often had it on projects that's like, wow, me and this person go very easily into a mind meld. And so if I have a tighter project, that's who I would work with first, because
right.
we'll be hyper productive together, or at least have a ton of fun doing it together. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right. Yeah,
So,
yeah, actually, several of the people here were also at the witches one.
okay.
But some of the people at the witches one were not here. But some of those same people I meet with a mastermind group on Saturday.
Mhm.
And all of us, regardless of the mastermind or these, we're all in a Slack group together and we do a lot of discussion. So there's various levels of knowing people. Like this one guy over in California, we get along great because we're very similar. We're both nerds. We like D&D, science fiction, Star Wars,
Yeah.
so when we're together, it's like, hey, Lon, how you doing? We talk like, we're good old friends, and I haven't seen him for 2 years.
Exactly.
And there's other people that we talk a lot of author stuff, but I haven't really worked with a whole lot. It's just one of those things. Being in the room talking author stuff all day, it creates that bond uh, between people.
Absolutely, shared experiences, and that, that you all have a vested interest. We want
Right.
the anthology to do well, and so you want it to be, everybody raise your game. You know what I mean? When you join a new band, you want to be like, well, I don't want to be the show off, but I also don't want to be the laggard. How do we all create something that's greater than the sum of the parts? You know what I mean?
Right.
This is that very cool. Okay.
Yeah. So
I've never done anything like that. I'm fascinated, you know what I mean? Because I've done improv, I've done things that were very much a shared activity, and I don't know, I am nowhere near a published author as you are. I have magazine articles, I've done essays. There's nowhere near a long form type thing. So I really am respectful of that. But then also to see the confidence that comes from, it's not only me writing by myself, you're kind of like opening the kimono to who else you're going to work with and what your writing style is. And the ideas, like we talked a little bit about this, it isn't that you have a shortage of ideas, and the ones you have, you got to hold on to diamonds. It's more like, well, I have so many ideas going through my head like a meteor shower that I kind of got to pick the ones that are the best out.
Right.
And sometimes it's in the act of talking to others that you'll see which are the ones that really immediately got somebody else's attention, and which are the ones where like, that didn't land, that didn't resonate.
Oh,
So
yeah.
maybe I know that one of the conventions for writing is knife the baby. The thing that you think is just so precious and so perfect, maybe that's where you're blindest about your own self-review, and that you really might need to have feedback from other people.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Better authors figure that out and ask
wonderful.
for it. Now,
Congrats, that's too cool. Okay.
There was a vampire boutique down there.
Okay.
And the lady that runs it was going to talk to us, but she just had knee surgery and she just wasn't up to it. But a lot of good stuff in the boutique. I emailed her and explained who I was. So as an Easter egg my story is going to involve Marie Laveau's zombie army that's controlling the French Quarter. And
Okay.
I'm going to use the character of this lady that runs the boutique. She's going to let me use her name. She wants to take over the French Quarter. So she makes a Faustian deal to raise vampires to fight the zombie army. And that's basically what my story is going to be about.
Very cool. Thank you for the prelude. That's very cool. All right.
Yay!
You
All
know,
right.
a quick impression of New Orleans. I was down there for a tech conference, and I remember I might have gotten a view. Like, of course, everybody goes out. You almost like become part of the nightlife because you go out when things are hopping. Well, I went out sometimes during the day to wander the city before the tech conference kicked off, and I stayed right in the French Quarter. And you know what? Seeing the French Quarter in broad daylight, not really as intoxicating as when it's at night and beads being thrown out for various different. And so I was like, wow, this is kind of like maybe a lady of the evening, the morning after, a little aged, a little not quite as impressive as when all the glamour is on from, the excitement and the alcohol and the night. And it had a certain, like, they're cleaning up from the previous night's festivities. So there's a certain amount of trash and a certain amount of urine scent and whatever else it might be. It's like, wow, I kind of wish I hadn't stayed here, because now I'm getting the behind the scenes view that this isn't magical. It's actually kind of tawdry, depending on when you show up, you know what I mean? So
we did hear a lot of good bands. We went to a couple bars just to hear some bands. There's a bar down there that is in the oldest building being used as a bar in the country from like 1700. Wow. And so that was cool. And I did go to a bookstore and I found one of Bill's books that I didn't have. So I held it up and sent a picture to him and Bria. I said, I went to New Orleans. All I got was this book.
Well, when he's got like dozens of books, it's kind of fun to find one that maybe is even out of print, but there it is still in this cool bookstore. So good for them. Yeah.
So I've got most of his stuff by now, so it's harder to find the ones I don't have.
Good for you for going to music. When you're in a town that like is made out of music, you got to go to the bars in Austin. You got to go to the bars in New Orleans, because that's such a great music town. So good for you, man.
Yeah, music is wonderful. That's one of the things I wanted to go hear some good jazz. And and it's actually hard on Bourbon Street. You have to go to Frenchman Street for the jazz and blues and all that stuff. Bourbon Street's this is how it was explained to me, that after Katrina in 2008, a lot of the old time places that were there left. The people were done and they didn't come back. So what came in, it was very modern. And so there's a lot of rock bands, cover bands, and it's not the traditional feel and style as much anymore.
Interesting. I was actually, I was going to ask about that. Sometimes cities go through dramatic changes like that, where there's a big fire and they kind of start over like they did in Chicago. There's a big flood, and like you said, people leave, or things that are washed away or made at least unusable. And so sometimes seeing the levels of Troy that got built up over the years, it's very interesting, but can also be kind of heartbreaking. With like, man, all my life I wanted to go to, I don't know, this particular on Bleecker Street in Memphis, and then just before I got there, they had a fire and burnt out. And it's like, now all I have is the Rolling Stone references. I never got a chance to go to it, and that's tough. So
I did see House of Blues. I did see the Fillmore down there, so that was cool. I will say advice.
Beale Street, by the way, Beale in Memphis, Street, not Bleecker. Bleecker's New York. Okay, anyway.
My advice is, when you get there, there's a sightseeing bus tour. It's a double-decker bus. It's called Hop On, Hop Off Sightseeing Tours or something like that.
Cool.
Just buy tickets, make it for 2 days or more if you can. Just because from our hotel, we could jump on a bus within a block, and it took us down to the French Quarter with Cafe Du Monde, which is big for the coffee and the beignets. And we didn't have to walk. It was only like 0.8 miles, but if you're walking 0.8 miles there and back, and you do that 2 or 3 times, you're like, okay, I'm done with this,
Okay. So depending on temperature, depending on how much time you have to put into it, you know what I mean? Just that Colleen and I have done things like that in multiple cities, Boston, Toronto, and so forth. We tend to walk everywhere we go, but after a while you're like, well, if we're going to get the 6 things done today that we want, I don't want to pare it back to 4. Let's find the easy way to get around, and that'll save us some time.
And I looked at my Fitbit. I put in 37 miles.
Fantastic. Sunday, so. Hats off, man. That's great.
It's like hiking. All I needed was a backpack. All right. So we talked Halloween. We talked New Orleans. What else is on our list? What'd you say?
Actually, so here, it's kind of funny. We really will do not just abrupt non sequiturs, but segues. One of the things that, like the shared world thing, a variation on that is where sometimes things have gone on for a while and the creator passes, but there really are a desire to keep the series going. There's rational inheritors to that. So Dune is on TV right now, and Frank Herbert wrote the initial Dune books, but there's actually, besides the, let's say, half a dozen in the initial Dune books, there's another half dozen that were written by his son and I think Brandon Sanderson.
Michael J. or Kevin J. Anderson.
Kevin J. Anderson, thank you, exactly. Yes, I should have, yes. They fill in like more about the Bene Gesserit, more about the, how spice and space folding was first discovered, and Duncan, Idaho, and the fact that I really like the fact that they were able to capture kind of not only the universe of it, the characters of it, but that the writing style was similar enough that it wasn't jarringly, well, before I was doing jazz and now I'm doing rock and roll, that kind of thing. And there's been a number of things where sometimes they try to continue it and maybe it is jarringly different. But for instance, I love the Robert B. Parker wrote a number of series. Spencer is his most well-known creation. The tough guy, private eye, probably 40 in the series, at least at 3 dozen, something like that. And he passed away 10 years ago. But the books about Spencer and about Jesse Stone up in Paradise and about Sonny Randall have continued to come out. And the foundation that is, the Robert B. Parker, I don't know, trust continues to find authors that seem to have a good feel for how they were written, a good feel for the characters, and that there's been very few books that were like, oh, okay, the series is dying now because James Bond has been on and off with people that followed Ian Fleming. So we can kind of start naming them. Sometimes it seems like it's a certain amount of, well, there's money to be made. And sometimes it's, well, they made a movie that wasn't based on the books, but someone's going to do a serialization, an adaptation of that anyway. Maybe they could write original James Bond books. And so I have my favorites for what seemed to really be like in the spirit of Phil Jose Farmer or Ian Fleming or whatever else it might be. And that's kind of a shared world. You know what I mean? Where like, does the guy sound like Parker would have written Spencer? Yeah. It's got that same terseness, kind of a Hemingway-esque, it's all dialogue. It's all there's very little exposition. It's all action and movement and key things happening as opposed to the loving descriptions of breakfasts and whatever else it might be, And so I'm impressed with the people that can do that they know that so well that they can fake being another person. You know what I mean? So having said that, what's that like for the person that's the author? And maybe you have bumped into this and you have interviewed various different undiscovered authors, but I always thought, boy, I would really like, if I was going to have a series, to have it be just mine. Part of what comes on in comic books is, well, you wrote a really good Daredevil series, but you didn't create it. You know what I mean? Frank Miller, for all that you wrote a fantastic run on Daredevil, you didn't originate that character. And what is it like to come into something where it's not only yours, that you kind of stepped in, wrote some great Doom Patrols, and then stepped back out? There's a different mindset to that, I guess. How much of a stamp can you put on your stuff?
Right. I know there are a couple authors I know that have worked in or created shared worlds. Okay. I haven't done anything other than this vampire and witches stuff, which is a very loose definition of a shared world. We're not trying to create actual history that everyone stays within canon. There's some differences. The one I know, Kindle used to have a shared worlds thing where you could write your books and put it in this Kindle worlds, and then other authors could write in that world and it would put it all together.
Right.
So
if your world was convincing enough, you would actually attract people to also contribute to it.
Right.
That's interesting.
And there's an author, Michael Anderle, who does that a lot. I mean, he's very much like James Patterson, where just about every book he comes out with is with a co-author. So he has this world, Kutherian world, I believe, that essentially he's written some books in, but then there's like 3 times as many authors who have written in that world with him. Together.
Interesting.
So Michael Anderle is one to look up if you like that type of thing, and tons of books.
I will. In fact, the whole world of fan fiction, we haven't really talked about this before. Besides the real world of books getting published by publishers and making it into bookstores, there's been fan fiction for a long time, and a lot of self-publishing on the net started because someone had written a really good Star Trek book, but the Star Trek publishers wouldn't do it, and they were like, there of course are always matters of copyright, and like you can't just start talking about Kirk and Spock, and especially fanfic being a certain amount of, ooh, there's stuff going on there that would never have been approved on TV, alien romance and whatever else it might be. But I like the fact that people love those things well enough that they're going to write more Firefly episodes.
Oh, yeah.
They want that world to continue, and so they do it. And sometimes the originals, the owners of such copyrights, really clamp down and don't want that. And in other cases, they have an awareness of the network effect that said, if we want this to continue to be in the public consciousness and people are kind of doing this for free, wow, why not? Whatever the entanglements of, you might loosen your copyright a little bit, but you've got twice as much material for people to know that exists in the Serenity and Firefly universe. That's an interesting trade-off.
And I think sometimes the big corporates don't get the world in that way, the way the world is now and the way kids and younger people think about it. A big example is Star Trek, because there's been fan fiction on the net since the net was created with Star Trek.
Absolutely. And back when all you could download was text, that's what there was.
And not only that, we have the Starfleet battles. That was totally based on Star Trek, that uses the same Gazinti and the Klingons and everything else that they throw in there. And it was kind of overlooked for a long time, even when they were doing Next Generation and, all of those. But then when the new movies were coming out, they clamped down on it, and the lawyers sent out cease and desist, and they closed down all these websites and stopped all.
And that's what it can be. Once there's real money involved, now it is time to tighten things up. And also sometimes it's just a matter of quality. I've read a lot of fanfic that was like, it is no wonder that this didn't get published. You know what I mean? You need an editor. You need to have a better grasp of the characters, whatever it was that it wasn't of sufficient professional quality. It was loving, but it sure wasn't great.
Right. But I think the reason they clamp down sometimes is erroneous. That they say, well, we don't want people to get confused as to what the official stuff is. I'm like, I don't think people get confused. And I think it's almost like kicking the fans in the teeth. We know you love it, but we want you to pay us for it. With some of this stuff, if you let the people go, let them write those stories. And in fact, George Lucas encouraged that for years. With the videos, I don't know if you ever saw, they had a yearly fan movie awards where
I have seen this. And he was one of the guys, thank you for mentioning him, because I knew that there were some that still had enough of the rebel spirit, enough of this universe is big enough. I've already made $1 skillion. I don't need to make the next skillion. It's okay to loosen the reins a little bit. But I think him saying that, and the money lawyer, et cetera, people saying that, not automatically matching.
I think what he realized that Paramount didn't is the people writing the fan fiction and loving aren't hurting your brand. It's not making people go, oh, I'm not going to watch the new Star Trek movie because, man, I have fan fiction. It's keeping it alive. These people love it and they want to keep it alive. And that's, the same as going to concerts. You remember back in the day, if you tried to smuggle a recorder in, how you get kicked out and banned and your ticket ripped up and all sorts of stuff. And now everybody has a cell phone, and they're finding that the more people record, the more they want to hear the music and buy the shirts and this, that, and the other thing.
That's exactly right. It took everybody a while to get to that, you know what I mean? And it hasn't been smooth. There's been all kinds of, fits and starts where that's piracy. And if you really are not only recording it, but selling it as if you're the authorized version, misrepresenting is a different thing. And that's always what I thought the cases were about. It wasn't just about that thing exists. It's more, are you representing it as if it is the real thing?
Yes.
Could it be mistaken for the real thing if people didn't know any better? It's how much of income are you really taking away, or how much brand, it's not only a matter of money, it's a matter of goodwill, if you will. If it can't be mistaken for that, even if it uses exactly the same names, then it doesn't really violate copyright, or at least arguably it doesn't. And so that's what some of the cool cases have been about, is trying to say there's no way that someone could have mistaken, the fact that you're worried about I don't know, a book series about Hellmann's, and you're saying people will not buy mayonnaise because of your books. Well, come on, you're being ridiculous. You know what I mean? So
and it's funny because people get so higher up, corporate get so worried in America about all these stomping on copyright, But you know how many countries there are where they have bootleg CDs you buy on the corner and movies, and it's the wrong
It's
covers, and you know,
exactly, there's whole streets, blocks, districts
yeah,
in Tokyo where that's all it is bootleg. You know what I mean? And not only their own stuff, obviously, it has been that way for a long time.
yeah,
And I don't know, I'm a big believer in intellectual property. I really want the people that did create it or were instrumental in its existing at all, they should indeed get just recompense for that. But then the reason that they have copyright law was because they said, okay, it exists and the author should be rewarded. And at first it was like 17, then it was 31. I'm trying to think of the exact numbers of years. But when they tried to make it, okay, that's going to be for like 91 years,
right,
3 generations of people, that the deal that you make with society, that, okay, now it's in the public domain and other people can make use of your good ideas, the more you kind of break that deal, the more it doesn't acknowledge that society has a vested interest in having a good artist community and in participating in that art as well. And the more that you tilt the table towards one or the other, the more it's like, well, sure, you're going to have the copyright for 90 years, but I'm willing to bet that it won't last more than 30 because people are going to stop caring about it if even in the act of saying it, somebody's handing them a subpoena. You know what I mean?
well,
So,
you can no longer say Heimlich maneuver. They copyrighted it and they enforce it, and it's like, okay, but what are you going
really?
to do?
Did they really? I mean,
Oh
is that?
God, yeah, you didn't hear that? You have to call
No,
it.
I did
Oh,
not
get this,
hear
you'll
that.
love this, Al.
That makes me vomit.
You have to call it an upward thrust. It's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
You know, as you know, I love words and study of words. And when you find out all the eponymous things that have become, like aspirin wasn't always just taking aspirin, it was originally a brand name.
Right.
Same with, you name it, Kleenex, and
Kleenex.
Xerox, and there's all kinds of things. And those were some of the first cases that were about, it isn't only like that you want to protect your brand name, it's more, aren't you proud that if anybody in the world thinks of something for the headache, they say aspirin? We couldn't get better brand penetration than that. Right. You know what I mean?
And so, you know, we're talking about the vampires in New Orleans. Here's an example of fan fiction and copyright and everything. So Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in 1897. He died in 1912. And during his, I mean, he was already in his 40s before he wrote that. It wasn't like he wrote it at 20 and lived a life of luxury based on this popular hit, because during his lifetime, it was not that popular. I think Dacre said they sold like 2,000 copies of the book.
Wow.
Which is actually quite a few, but you know, not
but
going
nowhere near what we think of nowadays, where
exactly.
It's millions of copies for the Potter books and stuff like that.
Okay. And now Dracula is in the public domain. There are, go look on Amazon, just look up Dracula and count how many books use Dracula. You know, this, that, how many movies they made, Dracula's daughter, Seven Brides of Dracula and all that. Right. And it's in the public domain. I can go to Gutenberg and download the full text of Dracula and read it for free. But Dacre said, since it was published, it has never gone out of publish. So it's still being purchased, still being bought. And I saw an annotated copy of it with an intro by Neil Gaiman. I'm like, oh my God, I'm on vacation. I don't want a big ass book and $80 for this, but I'm going to have to look that up, you know, because, you know, when you're really into it, that's the type of thing you want to get, you know, something like that. So it's a win-win. Everybody likes Dracula. It's still super popular because it's good. And that Disney, you may have heard about this recently with Disney. When Disney bought Lucasfilm and all of the Star Wars properties, they stopped paying the authors for the books they wrote. They still sold the books, but they stopped paying the authors. And none of the authors were big enough until Kevin J. Anderson said, wait a second, I'm not getting paid. And he had the clout to go to court.
What changed about this that now you should just say cut them off?
You know what they said? They said, well, we bought the property, but we didn't buy the responsibility of the contract.
So just that, saying that out loud, doesn't it make you like, you get to go to hell? You know what I mean? Yes. You know, everyone in the world would say that is the snakiest thing you could possibly have said. Wow.
And, you know, is Kevin J. Anderson going to want to write another Star Wars book? No. Chuck Wendig wrote some really great Star Wars books in the new canon. And I heard him on an interview with Jay. He said, yeah, I don't want to go do that again. It was kind of miserable to work in that environment. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
hello, you're destroying the property you just paid $4 billion for. You know, I mean,
That's a great way to put it. It isn't only a matter of them being, if you will, decent people. It is a matter of you have this asset. Don't you want to retain the value of the asset?
yeah,
And part of what you want to do is have every one of those authors could be your goodwill ambassador if you treat them decently. And if not, then they're actually like everything that goes on with any review on the net. When I don't get my car fixed correctly, it isn't only that you lost my business for the rest of my life, you've lost the 20,000 people that I'm going to be make very well aware of what fucking cheats you are.
right, right.
You know what I mean? And I don't know how people don't, especially in this interconnected world, that people just blithely don't seem to care about that.
Yeah.
And yet, I guess there is some proof that public sentiment is, they got the attention span of a housefly. They really don't retain from one
Yeah.
thing to another.
And I think what's sad for me is whoever is in the boardroom looking at the charts and the spreadsheets, it's, oh, well, this book only brought us in $100,000. That's not enough money to make it worth it. But what they totally miss is that book then led to a sequel and another sequel. And that book led to kids buying costumes based on those characters. And that book led to,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's more of an, there can be things that don't earn as much money, but support the things that do.
That's right.
So I guess that's why I'm not running the corporate boardroom, because I'm too open-minded about it or something. So,
well, I don't know. It's a sad way to close, if you will. But one of the things I always talk about is when that decision gets done, it isn't only that one person said that. There must have been 10 other pairs of eyes, the lawyers, the merchandisers, the marketeers, whatever else it might be. And they all kind of said, yeah, time to screw these people over. Yeah. You know what I mean? What's the great quote from Dune? The power to destroy something is the power over it. And sometimes that's what people think, is they want to not only have it so they can make use of it and make it better, but now they have the control over everybody else that says, if you don't do what I say, I'll just destroy it. I'll take my ball and go home. And that's a sick way to look at the world, and an increasingly commingled, collaborative world. And yet, as if that's new, there's all kinds of people that have always tried to corner the market on a commodity that everybody needs, whether it's gold or trees or insulin or whatever else it might be. That's how they get power, is by scarcity, artificial, sometimes created scarcity, and their ability. They just want the one that someone has to come to them and ask, and they love. There's a visceral love of being able to say no. I've seen it. I've seen it in people where they really, I wish I wasn't making this up, where someone like shuddered as if sexually when they made a decision that they knew had a big impact on another person. That weird power thing is really true for some people. Like, wow, I don't have that. And I think it's kind of sick that really you're not pursuing this to make the world a better place, to make more cool things exist, to make your fair share. Nope, you want to be the decider, and not a good decider. You want to be the monster, the authority monster. Oh well.
Here's real quick, two things. One, define this. Just kind of sums up the whole world. When I can go buy a sugary pop that is unhealthy for me, and it is cheaper than getting water. Okay, if that doesn't explain the world right there. Number two, before we go, my music recommendation of the week. Kiefer Sutherland has come out with his second album. It's very almost country, a little, maybe Bob Dylan-ish. It's just a lot of tunes that you can pick up an acoustic guitar and start strumming and sing. And he has the first, I don't know first song or not, but one of the songs I've heard called Something I Love. It's just stuck in my head. I love the theme of the song, the lyrics. There's nothing like outrageously cool about the song other than it really is kind of inspirational and
earwormy in the way that it stayed with you. That's cool.
So that's my music of the week. I had it on repeat for a while, listening to it because I wanted to get all the lyrics down. I want to learn how to play the song. It's got like 3 chords. It's not a difficult song.
And so actually, thank you. I hope you don't mind one more minute. Just on the net before we started to talk, came an announcement of Robbie Steinhardt though he has passed away, has a new album out called Not in Kansas Anymore. He was the lead violinist and co-vocalist for Kansas for a long time, went away, came back, etc. And I don't have it yet, so I can't vouch for its overall quality, but of course they have enough teaser little bits of music that it sounds like Kansas. It's wonderful and overblown and lyrical and pompous, and the violin as a lead instrument can be very emotional and evocative. And if this is what he was working on before he passed, it sure looks like not only are Kansas albums still great, The Absence of Presence is great, etc., Prelude and Implicit, but Steve Walsh's solo albums, especially one called Glossolalia, is one of I return to that album when I don't know what else I want to listen to again and again, because it's so good in terms of it sounds Kansas-y enough, but it's different enough that I get a new experience. And having said that, Colleen and I were starting to come out into the world again. We've been very careful about comedy clubs and concerts and stuff like that, about making sure we were fully vaccinated and what the place is like. The People's Bank Theater down in Marietta, Ohio has Kansas coming up the weekend before Thanksgiving. And they've always done a great show. And the live albums that they put out when they were doing like the Complete Left Overture and the Complete Point of No Return sound fantastic. And so I wanted to go see them. And the tickets weren't inexpensive. And yet that's going to be like, okay, let's go down there for Thanksgiving. We'll do a little bit of Christmas shopping, and it'll be crisp fall air, and we'll go to the Glass Museum and whatever else is in cool Marietta, Ohio. But the overall thing is I just can't wait to hear Kansas live again. Yeah. I love them. I really love them. Hearing The Wall live, it is inspirational and transporting in the way that you just talked about something to love. So I love that experience, man. That's another flow activity. I go to a concert and I just float through, play my air keyboards, sing with every song. Okay.
Yeah. All right, man.
Always a pleasure, Stephen. Take care.
Nice. Take care.
I'm glad your New Orleans trip was great. Okay. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Stephen's conversation on geek topics of the week.